Good Sunday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for Sunday, July the 10th. Today we are reading in Hosea chapter 8 and also 2 Corinthians chapter 3. Hosea chapter 8 and 2 Corinthians chapter 3 are on the schedule for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. Let's get the text up on the screen of Hosea chapter 8, and we'll begin reading in verse number 1. Put the horn to your mouth. One like an eagle comes against the house of the Lord, because they transgress my covenant and rebel against my law. Israel cries out to me, my God, we know you. But here's the issue. Israel has rejected what is good. An enemy will pursue him. They have installed kings, but not through me. They have appointed leaders, but without my approval. They make their silver and gold into idols for themselves, for their own destruction. Your calf idol is rejected, Samaria. My anger burns against them. How long will they be incapable of innocence? For this thing is from Israel. A craftsman made it, and it is not God. The calf of Samaria will be smashed to bits. Indeed, they sow the wind and reap the whirlwind. There is no standing grain. What sprouts fails to yield flour. Even if they did, foreigners would swallow it up. Israel is swallowed up. Now they are among the nations like discarded pottery, for they have gone up to Assyria. Like a wild donkey going off on its own, Ephraim has paid for love. Even though they hire lovers among the nations, I will now round them up, and they will begin to decrease in number under the burden of the king and the leaders. When Ephraim multiplied his altars for sin, they became his altars for sinning. Though I were to write out for him 10,000 points of my instruction, they would be regarded as something strange. Though they offer sacrificial gifts and eat the flesh, the Lord does not accept them. Now he will remember their guilt and punish their sins. They will return to Egypt. Israel has forgotten his maker and built palaces. Judah has also multiplied fortified cities. I will send fire on their cities, and it will consume their citadels. Hosea chapter 8. Here in Hosea chapter 8, you know that I color my Bible. You might not know, but I do. I color my Bible, and it gives me just at a quick glance an understanding of what's going on in particular text. And I like the prophets coloring because it's quite simple. If you're in my Sunday morning young adult Bible class, you know that my coloring system can get kind of crazy, a bit wacky. But here in the prophets, it's quite simple. And all I have in Hosea chapter 8 is a bunch of blue and a bunch of red and one bit of green, but that's just for a timestamp, but mostly blue and red. And what that tells me is that Hosea chapter 8 is all about sin and how sin is going to be punished. What is the sin that they had committed that had caused so much trouble? Well, it was the reality that they did not know God. We see that going back to chapter 6, don't we? In chapter 6, Hosea chapter 6 and verse number 9, I desire faithful love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. What was the issue here? They had no knowledge of God. They had no knowledge of God. They installed kings, not through God. They appointed leaders without God's approval, and they made idols. And if they would have known anything about Yahweh, if they would have known anything about the covenant, they would have known that idols were a big no-no, like almost rule number 1. I guess technically rule number 2, you shall make no carved images. That's a big deal to God. That's a very big deal to him. So for them to do these things just shows us their ignorance. And here's the thing. The reason why there's a bunch of blue and red is that sin brings about punishment if it's not repented of. So we can see that very clearly in verse number 7. Indeed, they sow the wind and reap the whirlwind. It was their action or inaction. It was their sin and rejection and rebelling against God, which leads to sin. And that right there is just the plain and simple takeaway that I want to note today. Here from Hosea chapter 8, if we sin and we reject God and we rebel against him, we will suffer for that. We will. Why? Because those who reject God, they will not enjoy his blessings. So may we today remember that if we want to enjoy the blessings of God, what is a blessing of God? It is this fellowship of God. It is peace of God. The idea of blessing goes all the way back to the garden. The garden was a blessed place because men and their God dwelt in unity and harmony and fellowship with one another, and anything that was enjoyed in the garden, that's a blessing. And that's what God seeks to give us. He seeks to bless us today, even as he did in the garden, again, with peace and joy and fellowship with him. If we want those things, we cannot reject him and rebel against him through evil and wicked actions. And that's what I'm taking away here from Hosea chapter 8 on this Lord's Day. All right, skipping over to 2 Corinthians chapter 3. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, again, within this letter, I don't remember exactly if I phrased it well enough last in our reading, in our first couple of readings through Corinthians, but I was reminded of this just doing some reading prior to doing this reading for today, that it seems as if that Paul has written to the Corinthians, and maybe he's actually had a visit that he's been able to have with them since then, and yet, even with all this going on, the Corinthians don't seem to really put much stock in what Paul says. And what we're going to see here in chapter 3 is that they might even be trying to get Paul to prove something. Like, hey, if you're really all you say you are, then why don't you get some people to write to us some letters that can really prove your credentials to us? Well, let's see what the Apostle Paul has to say about that here in chapter 3, 2 Corinthians chapter 3. Are we beginning to commend ourselves again? Or do we need, like some, letters of recommendation to you or from you? You yourselves are our letter, written on our hearts, known and read by everyone. You know that you are Christ's letter, delivered by us, not written with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. Such is the confidence we have through Christ, we have through Christ before God. It is not that we are competent in ourselves to claim anything as coming from ourselves, but our adequacy is from God. He has made us competent to be ministers of a new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. Now, if the ministry that brought death, chiseled in letters on stones, came from glory, so that the Israelites were not able to gaze steadily at Moses' face because of its glory, which was set aside, how will the ministry of the Spirit not be more glorious? For if the ministry that brought condemnation had glory, the ministry that brings righteousness overflows with even more glory. In fact, what had been glorious is not glorious now by comparison because of the glory that surpasses it. For if what was set aside was glorious, what endures will be even more glorious. Since then, we have such a hope. We act with great boldness. We are not like Moses, who used to put a veil over his face to prevent the Israelites from gazing steadily until the end of the glory of what was being set aside, but their minds were hardened. For to this day, at the reading of the Old Covenant, the same veil remains. It is not lifted because it is set aside only in Christ. Yet still today, whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over their hearts. But whenever a person turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. We all, with veiled faces, are looking as in a mirror at the glory of the Lord, and are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory. This is from the Lord, who is the Spirit. 2 Corinthians chapter 3. Now, Paul, again, it seems to be as if they are wanting Paul to try to prove himself. We talked about this a little bit in our last Bible class this past Wednesday night, how 2 Corinthians is a lot about that, a lot about the apostles having to, or at least Paul, showing himself as being numbered among the apostles. And he's saying, hey, you want letters? If you really want to see and know about the work that I've done, look at yourselves. You are the proof of the work that I've done in the Lord. You are the reason that, or you are part of the proof that I have been working in the gospel. In fact, Paul and some could say, I'm the whole reason you are what you are, because he was the one who took the gospel to them. Here's the thing. It is not that we are competent in ourselves to claim anything as coming from ourselves, but our adequacy is from God. That's the main point I want to focus on for just our thoughts from this text today, is that even though Paul could have said, listen, you are what you are because of what I did, because of the work of the gospel I did in you, even though that was a reality, he still says, it's not because I'm great. It's not because I'm adequate that this good work is at work in you, but it's because of what God has done. Paul knew that the message he preached was not the message of Paul. And we can go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 1 to recognize that it wasn't God, it wasn't Paul who died for them, but it was Christ who died for them. And it was the plan of God that was being acted out in their lives. Therefore, as we go about the same work of trying to share the gospel with others and live it out so that others might see the good work of God at work in us and seek to glorify him as well, let's never forget that the adequacy is not from us, but it is of God. The weaknesses that we have are made strengths through God's power and through his might and through his will. So today and always, of course, let's remember that. Let's never boast in ourselves. Let's never try to commend ourselves. Never think that we are great, for it is only one who is great, and that is the great God whom we serve, who we owe everything to. Thanks so much for tuning into this reading. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to always leave those in the comments section, either on Facebook or YouTube, or you can go to our website, loudoncoc.org, loudoncoc.org. You can go there and find the rest of our readings or any of the other work that the church has been producing in our Bible classes or in our preached lessons. You can find those on the website as well. Again, thanks for tuning in. Looking forward to being with everyone here in just a little bit as we gather for our Lord's Day Bible studies and worship assembly. Lots of classes going on today, classes for all ages, and you are welcome to join in if you might be in the Loudon area. Look forward to preaching here in a bit on the most famous thief in the world, the thief on the cross. Had a conversation with a man just within the last few weeks, and he brought up the thief on the cross and seemed to put a lot of stock in the thief on the cross, at least concerning our salvation. So I want to talk about that and hope to be able to equip us all to be able to answer well whenever people ask us particular questions concerning faith and practice and belief. So looking forward to doing that. We'll see you here in just a little bit. Take care. God bless.